All right, everyone, we are going to get started. Hello, 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 and good afternoon. And welcome to your StoryBolt session. My name is Obella Obbo. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I will be your host as we unpack the concept of self acceptance today through an authentic story and engaging conversation. So, we are going to dig into the concept of celebrating diversity through self love as we engage with stories about two women who learn to get comfortable with their physical disability and consequently address our culture of beauty and difference, which is something that we love to talk about at StoryBolt. We use the power of storytelling to enable courageous conversations around DEI topics and unpack implicit bias one story at a time. So, before we get started, or as we move forward, I would also encourage you, we do have closed captioning available for the session. And there are some instructions on how to do that in the chat. But before we actually dive into the topic itself, I want us to engage in a little activity to help, get our juices flowing, brains going in the direction of what we're hoping to discuss today. So you are going to see a white pop-up box on your screen. It will say Slido. Please click that button and it'll open you up in a new tab where you can input your answers to some questions on a poll that we have coming up. This exercise is called Aspects of Our Identity, and it will ask you to look at the intersecting parts of your identity and identify where you find strength and where you find discomfort. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is, you know, how we root ourselves in our identity. So answer each question to the best of your ability. If you don't understand the concept, feel free to just engage with the ones that you do understand. Identity is about how you identify. And that first question people are already populating. But what aspect of identity is the first thing that people see or notice about you? And we are quickly seeing gender and gender expression jump out first, but we are also seeing body type and size jump out. And I think that those are both very common reactions to um, uh, the physical expression of identity. And so that is somewhat what we would expect. And I do want to see if there are any more folks joining the poll. We won't rush too far ahead too quickly. Yeah, it looks like some other folks are still popping in and answering. But yeah, tell us what aspect of your identity is the first thing that people see or notice about you. Yeah, it looks like we still got a couple of folks joining, which I think aligns with how our numbers are looking. So definitely still, please jump in, tell us your thoughts, feelings, reactions. And I also do want to note before we jump on to our next question in the exercise, this is not at all a comprehensive list of our identities. And so, you know, you may find that something else fits that description. And please fill out the other. Also, feel free to get really active in the chat. I would love to hear folks' thoughts, feelings as they're processing these questions. Might be the first time that you've thought about these things in this way. And I would love to engage in that dialogue with everyone. So we'll go ahead and jump to our next question, and that is, this aspect of my identity causes me the most fear or anxiety. Let's see folks' responses. Ooh, yeah, disability or neurodivergence. I can absolutely see how that would be the case. And then body type and size again. And we are going to be talking today a lot about uh, sort of European and American beauty standards and how they play a role in the way that we look at our identities. And so that is absolutely going to be something. Uh, yes, Amanda, I'm seeing in the chat, fear and anxiety from others. You know, what aspects of your identity do you think people might react to in a way that makes you feel anxious or fear? Um, we're going to be talking a lot today about sort of beauty standards and how they impact the way that we uh, embrace and interrogate our identities. So I foresee an overlay between body type and size and gender, and also that neurodivergence aspect, and then absolutely the race aspect as well. How those all overlay, how they intersect, and how they feed into each other. And so, uh, it would only make sense, right, that an experience of neurodivergence might give you anxiety in a world that is trying to think of things very neurotypically. Um, and that goes the same for the rest of the identities there. All right, let's jump to our next question. This aspect of my identity causes me the most shame or confusion. Excuse me. Uh, I think our relationship with our identities as we get older, they change a lot. And so as they change, we can get like very confused with embracing that change, or with embracing the way that that change is reflected in society. And so I am definitely interested to see the responses, and I am uh, not surprised to see neurodivergence sort of kicking its way up at the top. Um, as we get older, we build a different relationship with our minds, right? With our brains, and they are absolutely shaped by our experiences and our traumas. So that makes a lot of sense. And to that same point, our bodies change a lot. We are able to build more thorough and independent relationships with our sexuality, which invites a lot of confusion. We are pushing back against the ways that we might be understood that our gender is supposed to be expressed in the world, and trying to reclaim that. And I don't think I need to do any explaining for how money can be confusing and even shameful sometimes. I think we have likely all been there in one way or another. All right, let's jump to our next question. This aspect of my identity makes me feel the most privileged. And so we know that privilege exists in so many different capacities. Uh, for example, what is not on the screen, but something that I often think about in terms of my own privilege, is my education. I have a master's degree. And there are a lot of people in my family who have not had the opportunity or the chance. And even though we have a separate conversation about loans, right? The availability for that higher education achievement wasn't available to them, and so that's something that I experience some privilege around. We're seeing a lot of race. We know that white privilege is a hot topic in society, right? But it's also a very real experience, right? We know that people are seen differently in the world based on their attributes. Gender, when it comes to male privilege, we do live in a patriarchal society. How I was talking about education is very much tied into socioeconomic status and the wealth that you might have. And then, of course, there are tons of other things that we have not touched on. And we will jump to the next question, and that is that this aspect of my identity people misunderstand about me most. We all know that none of our identities, none of our experiences exist in a vacuum. None of them are a monolith. And so, how people interpret your identity versus how you've experienced your identity can absolutely grade against each other. And so, what are the ways that that shows up for you? What are the ways that if someone looks at you, or if you were to tell someone something about your identity, their immediate thoughts are going to be not just different, but maybe even just like completely the opposite of your actual lived experience. We're seeing neurodivergence and disability. That is a no-brainer. We're seeing sexuality. And we know that because of this way that we talk about identity and labels, and how organic they can be, and how much they shift over the years, and how things have changed, so much even in the last few years, to try to get someone to understand something that's always changing can be especially difficult, right? We have socioeconomic status. To that exact point that I made earlier, I grew up middle class, but I grew up like middle class on paper. I grew up middle class on paper, but I've always been working. I've always been helping. It's always been a little bit more of a less relaxing experience than I think middle class is often thought to be. And that's something that I feel like can be very misunderstood when I'm trying to explain people my experiences, and especially even when I'm trying to acknowledge my own privileges. Uh, gender expression, I think, also falls into that umbrella of sexuality, body type, race, 100%. Right? There are so many misconceptions about our racialized experiences, and I think even we've had some conversations about that with this group of four. And then we will jump to our next question. And this is our last question. This aspect of identity makes me the happiest and the proudest. What is the aspect of your identity that you just are have such a strong relationship with? Brings you a lot of joy, brings you a lot of comfort. You have community within that identity. Maybe you have spaces that are super important to you within that identity. And I'm loving this. It's just great because we're seeing a little bit of everything. And that's how it should be. Let those numbers keep building. I love seeing the live shifting. I think it's a very fun way to look at all of this. All right. We are going to jump onto our film introduction, and you feel free to keep the slide tab open on the side, but we're going to jump back into it, and we are going to move to our film, and that is Head to Head, Part 1, which is all about identity by our filmmaker Andrea Alberti. Through the process of tracing the path of human hair, the three sisters behind this film unfurl deeper questions about the human social experience. We are forced to ask ourselves, what are we hiding about ourselves for the simple hope of fitting in? And how far will we go to keep it under wraps? The women in this film experience traumatic blows to their self-image after unexpectedly losing their hair. Although they both experience subsequent mental health, relationship, financial, and social impacts, they individually cope with these challenges in dramatically different ways, and we will absolutely get into that. But once the film starts, we encourage you to put your browser into full screen mode using the full screen button on your toolbar. I would also like to encourage you to share your thoughts in the chat while you watch or utilize the reactions function. So in that toolbar, if folks want to just test it out with me, if you hit react and whatever happens, it pops up in the side. I love that. Please continue to ask questions, put thoughts in the chat as you're watching the film, stuff that we can come back to and engage with, or questions that are coming up for you, or anything like that. If you share experiences, I would love to hear that. And then one last thing is that in that chat box, in the top right corner, you'll see a little bell. Please click it so that it has the slash through it to turn your notification bell off. So please still continue to react. Please feel free to engage in the chat, but we want to make sure that you're able to still focus on the film. So that'll turn off the dinging so that every time someone leaves a comment, it doesn't go off. And we're going to get into it. Please enjoy the film. We will talk to you in just a few seconds or a few minutes. All right. I hope everyone enjoyed the film. I would now like to invite you to join a conversation with our storyteller and filmmaker, Andrea Alberti. Andrea is a videographer, editor, and animator based in Chicago. In 2012, she co-founded the creative agency Amelia Street Studio, where she managed the video department and produced video and digital content. She currently works as a training coordinator at Can TV, where she directs, edits, and co-produces a monthly studio show for the Chicago Special Olympics. She previously served as a technical director for Can TV's live studio programs. Andrea got her start as a production assistant and honed her skills while working as a producer and editor for the regional true crime television series Crime Stoppers, or Case Files, airing on WPWR Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrea.
Thank you for having me. How's it going?
Oh, it's going super well. And thank you so much for that film. That was just amazing.
Yeah, sure. I love seeing all the little emojis that were
I know,
popping up.
the reactions are great.
Yeah.
All right, folks, as I kick things off with a couple of questions, I would also like to invite you to continue to use the chat to join the conversation. So please post your questions in the chat and we'll bring as many as we can to our guests. Should you wish to submit anonymously in the questions tab next to where it says chat, you can use the questions function to submit an anonymous question. So definitely join in with us on this great conversation we're about to have. And I will kick us off, Andrea, with our classic StoryBolt question, which is why did you want to make this film and why are these types of films and narratives important?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question because I mean, I have to. When we initially started, like on production, like we didn't really know. I mean, what we had in mind was completely different than what it ended up being, and so it really became over time. We just kind of discovered what it was that was kind of like drawing us to make this project. Because I don't know. To be honest, like I mean, I produced this with my sisters, and it was just going to be a story, just kind of like educating people about alopecia in the hair industry and having alopecia myself and having to like work within the hair industry. I was like, okay, yeah, no, this seems interesting. I guess a lot of people don't know about it, but it really did kind of grow out of that and turning more into like the more internal pressures or I don't know, journey, I guess you could say, that people going through hair loss kind of have to go through when they are dealing with something like that. And then realizing that like it's a lot of universal feelings.
Hmm.
Like I kind of started to realize, especially when I was sharing the film with other people and people in my life, and them just kind of like, oh, this like kind of, makes me think about my own struggles is like being queer, being a person of color, being, any sort of like othering sort of identity. Like
Hmm.
the feelings are actually incredibly universal. And I think that was what I really wanted to hit home was the fact that like even if you don't have any sort of hair loss issues, like you can identify with these people. Like they are telling stories that I'm sure yourself have. And like when you realize that, that just kind of allows you to be, I don't know, like a more understanding person. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think what's especially, I think, impactful about this type of story is that it's about something that's like quote unquote just hair. When we think about these things about identity, we're talking about all of those bigger things. My queer story, my black story, my whatever story that it might be. But it's like this is actually so important, right? And is absolutely tied to and
Yeah,
salient with all of the other sort of the things that feel super big, which I love.
hmm for
Yeah.
sure.
In the film, Jillian discusses the impact of having to mask a part of who she is, and how it impacted her mental health. So, how do you think that feeling of not being able to show up as your whole authentic self because of some aspect of your identity feeds into all of the wellnesses, your physical, your mental, your emotional wellness?
Yeah, I do find it to be kind of somewhat of a two-sided deal. Like to be honest, like masks can also kind of be a tool,
Mm,
like
mm,
I kind of think that I mean even even when you feel somewhat anonymous, you kind of feel freer to do what you wouldn't do otherwise, And that's kind of how like in some ways like wigs were helpful for me in that regard. Like it did kind of allow me to like feel more comfortable to do other things that I wouldn't have done otherwise.
mhm,
But it is absolutely a double-edged sword. Then it did inhibit me from doing things that I also wanted to do. And I think once I kind of like realized that fact that it's both and it's not either or, that's kind of where I became more comfortable with how I showed up in the world. And like, for me personally today, like sometimes I wear it and sometimes I don't and I feel fine either way,
mhm.
and I really wanna get away from this thought that, like, the only way that you're truly being yourself is if you're being all of it all the time to everybody all at once? And I just, like, don't really think that's a reality that people can live in. I don't know. I know this, like, might feel like a bit of a hot take, but I just kind of feel like it's I don't know. It's really limiting sort of to make people think that you can only be happy if everything is out at once. And I
Hmm.
just don't really think that's true. Um and putting pressure on people to feel like they're not really being themselves until they, share this fact, I think is also like, I don't know, that's hurtful in a different way. Yeah.
Ah, I love that so much. I think I think the most adult thing that you can really learn is that two things can really exist at the same time, and it's like it's not necessarily about the mask itself, but like the ownership of it, right? Like if this is my mask
Yes.
that I get to put on because I want to, that's a lot different than feeling like I have to put on this mask in order to, you know, be able to function normally.
Right. Yeah, it
Yeah.
becomes a choice, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because also we don't always need to bring our whole selves anywhere.
No.
You know?
Nor should you. Like, you shouldn't be talking to a four-year-old the same way you talk to, like, your friend when you're having drinks, like, it should be
100%. Yes, exactly. I couldn't agree more. So, to keep it on Jillian, actually, she discusses the struggle of like carrying her alopecia as a part of her identity that defines her. And so, what do you think? And sort of to the point that we've been talking about, right? Like, what do you think helps to instigate that transition from like, this whole thing defines me to this is just a
Mhm.
part of me that I, can claim and have ownership of in the way that I want to? How do you sort of get there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I do feel like, I mean, it's so, like, depends on the person.
Hmm.
And I think that's kinda why, like, in this kind of version of the documentary, I did wanna put Ebony's and Jillian's stories together because they both kind of seemingly went in different directions, but were still struggling with the same things at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Like, even though Jillian was, like, still very much relying on wigs and Ebony wasn't, like, they both equally had ups and downs, regardless of what was happening around them, if they were having successes or failures. It really didn't come down to that one thing. And I think that was something that, like, even I, maybe to this day still kind of struggle with, of just like, yeah, just kind of centering like, oh, everything would be better if I, had my hair, or didn't care if I didn't have my hair, and just like realizing that it's not all lumped together. Yeah. And that's something that I think I still kind of have to work on. I don't know if that answered your question though, really.
No. I also am not sure that there's
There's not really an answer. I
yeah.
don't know. It is a bit unknowable. It's person to person for sure. But
Yeah.
I think it's finding that, it's realizing that fact and not comparing yourself to others, which I know is like something that is really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, sort of like great tack on question to that is, how do you think that, the spaces you're in, the environment you're in can help like support that transition? So like, we're here talking about the workplace, but really any place can
Right.
like help get you there or just, provide the right space for you to get yourself there.
Yes. And I think that's providing space is definitely the like term there, because I think there had been moments, at when I've been in workplaces where I kind of felt like people were trying to like, open the door a little too wide for me. It's just like, okay, it seems like there's an ulterior motive here that you kind of want to happen a little bit. And I think it's, yeah, like I don't really think that it should be a workplace's job to like force a person into some sort of like transformative event.
Yeah.
It should be, some people just want to go to work. you know? And there have been times where, like I felt moments where I was working with other people and I think they were completely well intentioned, but it was like, here I am at this place of business and here I am like just doing my job and not thinking about my hair. And then somebody
Mm.
was just like, hey, let's think about your hair. And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." I was, like, actually having, like, a brief moment of space where I was just, like, being, like, a person at their job, and now I have to be this other thing all of a sudden.
Mm.
And so I think it really is about the giving space. It's really about, like, not trying to force something to happen, and I think that comes from, like, having like true empathy, which is not sympathy,
Mhm.
which is not assuming you know what another person is going through necessarily. Like maybe that person actually like went through a lot that day just to be able to get to work, with their wig on, or, whatever other thing that they have going on. Like maybe them being there is enough, and like being happy that they're there and just like treating them like everyone else is kind of it. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I really, I couldn't agree more. It feels,
Yeah.
I say all the time, like, uh, it's definitely difficult, I think, still, but it still is that simple as just like providing the space.
Yeah.
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 Oh, I really like that. Can you talk a little bit about, and we've mentioned a little bit, but like those intersections. So I really loved sort of hearing Ebony talk about her experience as a Black woman with alopecia,
Mhm.
and how do we embrace sort of those intersections as a part of uh, claiming this like self acceptance and self love? Like, how do we meet ourselves at all of us, you know?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And I think like through the process of making this, like I really did kind of have to go through and like reevaluate my own self and my own relationship to it,
Mhm.
to my alopecia, because I think I had kind of like definitely had kind of like sectioned it off. And not and there's good ways to do that and there's bad ways to do that. And I kind of felt like I was doing it in maybe not the greatest way. Yeah, so I think, and I think like also just this, especially now in today's culture, there seems to be a really interesting need to kind of like list all the things that you are. Let's categorize every possible thing box you could fit in, and let's make sure everybody knows like, okay, I'm not this kind of person, I'm that kind of person, I'm not this kind of person, I'm that kind of person. And I think while it is good to define things, like it definitely is helpful to define, I think sometimes it can very easily spill over into like another way you're just like using yourself to kind of other yourself from
Mm,
other people. Like when you really strongly like have that definition just become your identity, then you're kind of flattening yourself. You're kind of turning yourself into a cartoon character a little bit.
mhm,
And I think that's something that I think has kind of like this really wonderful like you know and hard growing process that it does seem like us as a culture are going through, of like understanding that there are people who are out there that maybe like aren't getting a fair shake, don't get chances that other people have, or like are having to exist in a world that doesn't really acknowledge them as people. Like I think our knee-jerk reaction is just like, okay, let's just define every single possible person that possibly exists, and then we'll just all know that everything, and then everything will be fine. And I don't really think, like I don't really think that's super helpful. You know,
yes.
and I and I really think it's important for people to know that like you're gonna step in it, like I step in it. It doesn't matter like how well you educate yourself, it doesn't matter what your own personal identities are. You're going to at some point in your life make another person uncomfortable because of you didn't know something, you know
Mhm,
you're going to step in it. And it's knowing that that's going to happen and like choosing how you're going to react to that moment. That's what makes for, a world or a workplace that like actually welcomes others. That's making space. It's just like knowing that you're not going to be perfect, not trying to prove anything to other people, you know,
yes.
and just like really like releasing a really large amount of ego surrounding around the fact that like you don't know anything and you're not going to know everything, and that's okay.
Yes, I love that. I think it's there's really like a power to, in understanding all of the various things that you are, you also have to understand how just like wholly different other people have the capacity to be. And then if you
Mhm.
sort of remove those assumptions, you can create a really like we talk about like safe versus brave. Like you can create a brave space where people can um feel comfortable showing up authentically and make it uh make it safe, right? Because people
Right.
are brave, right? It's
Yes,
almost like
yes.
the brave comes first. So I
Yeah,
think, yeah, that's super important. Thank you so much for that.
yeah.
And I am getting caught up because I'm still enjoying this conversation and not looking at the time. So
No.
I want to ask our, like, our classic last question, which is just, what do you want folks to take away from this film and from this experience and all of that?
Yeah, um, I guess, yeah, just to really hit home that, like, these people are not actually that different from you, that, like, they have gone through moments and have had experiences that are very much similar to your own. And also to, like, keep in mind, this is kind of like a more, like, overarching general concept of, like, what documentary film is, but, people aren't stories, people are people. Like, no, this was like a really hard thing for me to kind of like figure out, but like people's life is not an arc, it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. Like, it's not just like they figured it out and now everything's fine, like it's a constant journey, and like it's going to go up and down, and that's just, yeah, just being accepting of that fact, and being accepting the fact that, like, there will be moments where somebody will feel really comfortable to share something with you, or they won't, or they might share with somebody else that's not you, and you have to be okay with that, like, it's not clean. It's just nothing's clean. I
Yes.
guess that's what it is.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for this film. And thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Oh,
And
thank you for having
this
me.
was awesome.
Yeah,
We are really, really appreciative.
absolutely. No, thanks again. Thank you, everybody.
All
Yeah.
right, everyone. So as Andrea slides out, I'm going to jump into the what's next with our little bit of time left. You will see on your resource sheet that there's a section at the bottom where you can find suggestions on how we can take action and continue our journeys in unpacking and confronting our biases, especially around this idea of self-love and self-acceptance. And that resource sheet includes some resources that can help you sort of like dig deeper and figure out how to make an impact, as well as some self-reflection questions that can help you spark conversation. And I would love for you to take this to other folks that you know, other people in your offices, all of that good stuff. And then, as a first act of sort of allyship in this regard, we would love for you to give us some feedback. So, you're seeing the research sheet pop up on the pop-up box, and then you will also see uh, a survey from StoryBolt that'll give you the opportunity to sort of just like tell us directly and anonymously, and tell your leaders directly and anonymously what you want from your DEI program, how you can make this space more psychologically safe, what you feel like you're getting value-wise out of these experiences, and how we can make them better for you. I am our learning experience designer at StoryBolt, so I personally really appreciate the feedback. If you don't mind giving us a couple of minutes really quickly. And I will thank you all for engaging in this conversation around celebrating difference through self acceptance and self love. And we really want to wrap this up with a quote that we think really encapsulates the experience. And so we're going to quote the late Maya Angelou. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. And so, from all of us at StoryBolt, thank you for attending the session today and have a great rest of your afternoon. I hope you all had a great time, and thank you.